Welcome everyone and say thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. I'm Jennifer Estop and I work here at Canadian Ministries as Grant Program Coordinator. And we are very thankful today to have the Reverend Dr. Peter Coots running today's webinar. He's going to be speaking on the session as congregational leaders. And we're really excited to learn more and hear what Peter has to say. But just before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go over. We're asking that everyone please keep their screens off. And if you could also please make sure your computer is muted. That will just ensure that there isn't any background noise happening while Peter is speaking. And also to keep in mind that we are recording today's session. So it will be available to view about an hour after it finishes. There's also a chance for you to ask questions. On the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a chat box. And so you can type in your question, and then towards the end of the presentation, around the last 10 minutes, I'll help to coordinate those questions and pass them on to Peter for him to answer. So I think that's it, and I'll pass it over to Peter. Thank you, Peter, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I'm pretty excited to be doing this. I've only done one of these before, so this is fun. I hope participants find this helpful. I've actually planned for about 40 minutes presentation and time, and then to have about 20 minutes available for question and answer. And the content, as you're listening to it, may sound a little dense, but two things. First, I'm only making 9 different points in the 40 minutes, and I'm expecting you'll be able to receive a full script of this presentation, everything I'm going to say. So you can relax, listen, take note as needed, and we'll go from there. So I recently compared 8 authoritative lists on 8 authoritative lists on what makes a vital and faithful congregation. And among those 8 different lists, there was only one character quality that was common to all of them, and that was faithful and capable leadership. Vital congregations require capable and faithful leaders. And this is more and more true with every passing year, and it has been since 1958. So why do I say that? Leadership is always contextual, and our 2 main contexts are changing rapidly. The first context is society beyond our congregation, and it's been changing dramatically now for a few decades. And the other context is our congregations, where we seek to be leaders, and the societal change is having a big impact on congregational life. So Presbyterian sessions today have to express leadership more and more than we have had for generations. So what is leadership? Every single one of us has our own personal working definition of leadership. You may hold it consciously, or it may be subconscious for you, but either way, we work out of our own definition all the time. And so here's 3 definitions that I like that work together. The first, leaders bring the future to the present. We bring concerns about the future of our congregations into present reflection. And then we choose to take present action for the sake of the future well-being of our congregation. The second one, tackling tough problems that often require an evolution of values, is the end of leadership, and getting that work done is its essence. Leaders are called to tackle the tough, important issues of our congregations. I just saw a pop up there. Someone studied Bruce Avolio. Bravo. We are called to tackle tough, important issues in congregational life, and there are quite a number of them.
Can I record this?
The values people hold will frame how they'll understand problems, and they will create the point of view that they'll have in seeking solutions. But dealing with deep issues in congregational life often requires reviewing and revising the values and priorities a congregation has. And this is part of what makes change in congregations challenging, because we're asking people to reflect on and perhaps revise their sense of beliefs, values, priorities. The last bit in this definition is leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It means it's about helping people to choose and pursue new aspirations. Leaders are fundamentally in the motivation business. So how do leaders go about leading? How does a session express leadership? There are many, many ways and many different ideas about how leadership works. Just to give you an idea, here is my shelf that contains books on leadership. And now here is my collection of books on the right. It's my collection of books on motivation. And so there are many, many ways to describe how leaders go about leading. But for today's purposes, we're going to look at a leadership process, a sequence of steps your session can take that walks you through the tasks of leadership as you deal with an issue. For each of these steps, I'm going to talk about why it's important, and I'm going to follow just as a running illustration, the story of one session dealing with an important issue that I think is common to many of our congregations. So let's get on with that. So the first step is scanning, the first practice of leadership. It is being mindful of congregational life and mindful of the congregation's wider context, which is the surrounding community and society. Scanning seeks to observe what is changing and emerging. And those changes could be positive things that a congregation should be capitalizing on, could be negative things that can bring harm to the life of a congregation. The first role of a session is to watch and notice, to take note of what we see. Scanning's important. We can only address issues that we are aware of, and sometimes dealing with them sooner is easier than waiting till later when they become really big problems. And I believe scanning is a pastoral practice. It's an expression of faith-filled care. In congregations, more often than not, scanning discovers needs within the congregation or the neighborhood. Those needs are things we can feel empathy about, and they can point us in directions where we can help people as servants. So in the congregation I served, the session in its scanning noticed that the elder district system wasn't working. Now, most sessions see that their district system isn't working. And most sessions look at this issue as a nuisance problem that needs to be managed. And so what we tend to do is move congregants from one district to another. We cajole elders to take more congregants into their districts. We try to get new elders on board to share the load of the, being connected with people in their district. We can even categorize congregants as needing visits, not needing visits, perhaps even create a district of congregants that we're not even going to care for anymore. Does that sound familiar in your session? Our session noticed that the elder district system wasn't working, and that these different management solutions that we had been using were really not solutions at all. Scanning is a pastoral practice. Our fixes in our situation were failing, Elders were feeling guilty that they weren't fulfilling their responsibilities, and we were losing touch with some congregants. The elders saw what they always saw about the district system, but this time they really took note of it and wanted to know why it was failing, which leads to the next step, sense-making. This is the practice that once you noticed an issue, you begin to ask, why is this really happening here? What is at issue here? What's the root? What's the causes? It's my sense that many sessions don't work hard enough and long enough at sense making. The human animal seems to be satisfied with superficial analysis, and we crave simple answers for our problems. But the problems that dog our congregations tend not to be simple, and the solutions aren't either. So one simple practice to avoid superficiality is to ask, why? When you notice an issue, ask, why is the issue the way it is? And for each of those answers you get, ask again, and why is this the way it is? By asking why of each answer, you drill down to see the roots of the issue. So our session decided to try to make sense of our challenge in making the district system work. We asked, so why can't we make it work? And we heard about the usual suspects. Elders were busy. The people we visit are busy. It's hard to make appointments. I feel like I'm imposing. Time just passes by and I never seem to get around to it. So we took those kind of answers and then we asked why of each of them again, and we continued to drill down to find some of those root issues. And some of those root issues were, for some elders, district visitation was simply not a priority. Visiting for some elders was an anxious experience. They wanted to avoid that feeling of anxiousness, and so they didn't visit. We found that being trained to conduct visits actually did not help some elders feel capable of visiting. Visiting made some elders feel guilty, but there's different kinds of guilt. And we found that the guilt they felt showing up at a visit, seeing someone they haven't seen for a long time, that guilt in the moment, person to person, felt stronger than the guilt of not actually setting a visit up in the first place. So it was simply felt less guilty for some people not to do it at all. And those who liked the visiting and those who did it well, we found had a real pastoral heart for people. So we conducted a poll. We asked the elders if they could choose, which options would they want to follow? Just conducting church business only, or doing pastoral visitation only, or as an elder doing both church business and pastoral visitation, like the Book of Forms suggests all elders should do. And what did we find? We found that 40% of our elders preferred just to do the church business. 40% preferred only to do the pastoral visitation, and only 20% were content to do both, which the Book of Forms assumes everybody will do. So that was making sense of our situation, which leads on to the next item, and it's an assessment. It's asking the question, is this a management moment or a leadership moment? So management moments occur when you have a clearly understood issue and accepted functional solutions for the issue. So for example, you arrive at worship and there's not sufficient ushers to collect the offering. So the solution is you tap a couple of people on the shoulder and you ask them to help. That's a management moment. Leadership moments occur when the issue is not clearly understood and a solution is not readily apparent. So an example here, the young adult members of our congregation who grew up here are no longer interested in attending church. It may not be clear at all why this is so, and the session can be lost for solutions. That is a leadership moment. When you have done sufficient sense making, you have to assess what you're looking at here. And if it looks like this is a leadership moment, then you can just move on with this process. For our session, we looked at the challenges of making the district system work and realized that addressing this issue would take a more fundamental change than we've been trying previously. So moving on, the next step I think should be faith reflection. Faith reflection should be a habit for the leadership of a faith community like a church, but I find that it's not often a habit in our congregations. I think our management mindset is so ingrained in congregational leaders that many sessions seem to skip this step. God desires congregations to pursue some great overarching purposes, but I think we assume that just by being a congregation, those purposes are being fulfilled already. So all we have to do is manage it. But as we've seen, leadership moments occur when the issue is not clearly understood and a solution is not readily apparent. So part of the leader's work is to go back to the first principles and ask, at its core, what does God call the church to be? And to ask a question like, how do we see in the New Testament the followers of Jesus pursuing these kind of callings? So in our example, the elders explored several New Testament passages about the work of elders and bishops, the centrality of care in Christian ministry. And we also noted the story found in Acts 6. The apostles were so busy teaching and leading that pastoral care was being overlooked. And so they called 7 people to be specialists in care. So what did the early church do? They recognized that in their situation, leadership and pastoral care could be understood as separate tasks, with people with specific giftedness fulfilling those tasks. And the decision they made was actually quite practical. We also noted that the Book of Forms permits the office of deacon, which in part can be used to meet the need for care in the congregation. It's important, I think, to bring the congregation into conversations about change. If a congregation needs to be solidly supportive of some new innovation or direction, then it's important to open up discussion in the congregational life sooner rather than later. And here again, we tend to focus discussion on the wrong thing. Specifically, too often, the first conversation sessions have with a congregation as a whole is when they're ready to propose an idea for change. And the congregation's not been brought on board in conversations around current realities earlier. I'm a firm believer that conversations need to start earlier, focusing on the concern, the issues. The congregation needs to understand and appreciate that the issue is an actual issue and a concern. And the goal of these early conversations is to build a consensus that how things are now is no longer acceptable. If a congregation comes to uniformly feel dissatisfied with the status quo, then that builds motivation, it creates resolve to find solutions, and it increases the probability that the congregation will accept a future proposed direction. if we wait as church leaders until we've got a solution for an issue that the congregation hasn't been on board with, they may actually say no to the solution, and that can end any progress. But if the congregation has been really brought up to speed on what the challenge is before the church, and they become convinced that this is a challenge that needs addressing, then that begins as the first motivational impulse to help them deal with change. And even if a solution is posed later that the congregation doesn't like, they're able to fall back on the motivation that we still have a problem to fix. And so, so it's great to have that initial sense of, you know, a consensus around there being dissatisfaction with the status quo. In our example, our session highlighted for the congregation our desire to improve upon the traditional district system, and the congregation simply viewed that initiative as a good thing, because you know, making pastoral care better in the church is beyond debate in the minds of most members. At this point, it is good to enter into a learning phase. So far, the session has recognized there's an issue. We've drilled down by asking why to figure out the origins of the issue. The congregation's on board desiring this issue to be addressed. We've done some faithful reflection on the topic. And so the next obvious question is, okay, so now what do we do? If the leadership process is going to break down, this is typically where it happens. Recall that I said that a leadership moment occurs when the issue is not clearly understood and a solution is not readily apparent. Figuring out the solutions, the directions, is where the rubber hits the road in a leadership moment. And that's because solutions are not a part of our history, not a part of our habits. It's not something we've experienced before. And these things create natural limitations for our imagination and our point of view. As we often hear, it is hard to think outside of the box. But at this point, a session can feel a real natural pressure. Imagine two opposing forces representing two realities at this moment. The first force is the recognition that we have to make changes. But then the other one is the recognition that we don't know what we are to do. And these two forces work in opposition, and it can quickly impede progress, and it can become an impassable impasse. Sometimes what we try to do in order to get past that impasse is we just up the pressure on the sense of we must change. And but if there's still no sense of what do we do, this becomes perhaps for the congregation a crushing impasse. So how do you break through it? Set learning goals. And there's three ways you can go about this. It's about learning what different options do we have, avenues for addressing our challenge. And three simple ones are: pick up a book on the topic. There's lots written on the challenges that are common to churches, and a growing body of material, articles, and books on that. The second possibility, is to look for congregations that have already addressed the issue that you have. Oh, I'm a slide ahead. Address the issues that you already have. See if you can find several different congregations that have done it several different ways, so you feel you've got some options. A third way is to design and try some small-scale prototype solutions. Remember that leadership moments occur when the issue is not clearly understood and a solution is not readily apparent. And so prototyping is trying on a possible solution on a small scale for a brief period of time. And the goal of prototyping is to learn from the experience of doing. Trying the prototype will help you become clearer about the nature of the challenge, and it will help you move towards a workable solution for your issue. So in our session dealing with the district system, we tried two things. We prototyped. We thought one possible solution could be having elder districts that are twice the size of a normal district, and then have 2 elders serving the double-sized district. And so we created one, and we tried it for a year. And the experience was reviewed, and we learned that it addressed a couple of the issues, but fundamentally not all. And on that basis, the session decided not to go further down that road. So we used a prototype as a trial solution to learn more about the nature of the challenge and whether this kind of solution will actually help. We also looked for congregations that had developed their own solutions for the challenges of elder districts. And to our great surprise, we discovered a number of churches out there that had a variety of practices that were variations on the district system or complete replacements for the district system. The last practice here I just want to highlight is decide the direction, implement the direction with determination, and learn from the experience. Because our limited time together here, I want to focus on the implementation bit for a new direction. Because this is the number 2 hump when leading change in a congregation. 2 facts about implementation. The 3rd largest survey ever conducted of American congregations found that half of congregations have adopted officially a direction, but they have insufficient motivation to pursue implementation. So half of congregations have a direction, but they're not motivated to get on with it. The second learning is that across all organizations, regardless of what kind of organization they are, 70% of planned change initiatives fail during the implementation phase. So this is really incredibly important. For any church turning vision and reality, it is hard. And there are several ways to address this challenge, but I want to just focus here on one. Develop an excellent plan for implementation. Because this is a very important motivational step. An excellent plan is motivational because it strengthens the congregation's beliefs that we can do this. And there are many resources to help you learn how to develop an excellent plan. But just to highlight a bit, describe clearly and concretely the goal that you want to pursue. Vague goals fail to shape the implementation, and they fail to motivate. The goal should paint a picture of what the outcome you desire will look like in a detailed way. Name the steps and the stages that you're going to pass through to get from here to goal attainment. These are often called objectives. Make them easily understandable, realistically achievable, make them assignable so people doing the work of implementation know exactly what they have to do. Make them measurable so you can see that you're making progress. Make them controllable so people can actually do it, make progress, and have success. When you're into this implementation phase, remember that you are still learning. As I've been saying, leadership moments occur when the issue is not clearly understood and the solution is not readily apparent. Even when you have a congregational consensus to pursue a specific direction and a plan that you're convinced will work, there will still be some uncertainty whether you've really understood the issue and whether this really is the perfect solution. So as you proceed through implementation, learn from the experience of implementing it. Be willing to adjust the plan as you go. When I served Oak Ridge Church in London, Ontario, the Long Range Planning Committee was a committee that had a motto. It's the only committee I've ever seen that had a motto. And they called it Pursuing a Moving Target. And that sums up what I'm saying here. As you progress towards the goal, as you're implementing your plan, you are going to learn and see new things that could shift where you're going. It may not be a surprise that that committee had that kind of goal, because the guy chairing that committee had a master's in business administration from Harvard. So he was way up on this stuff for us. So in our example session, thinking about elder districts, this session decided to do a few things. They questioned the Book of Forms assumption that every elder can be an excellent generalist, capable of leadership, congregational management, and pastoral care. They decided to let elders focus their involvement in the areas of leadership, congregational life that were their interests and where their giftedness lay. They looked at the Book of Forms option to have deacons, but after some consideration dismissed it as an option that they thought it was not realistic for our congregation. It was agreed to keep the structure of the district system, but no longer require the district visitor to be an active serving elder. Rather, following the Act 6 example, they decided that some of the districts could be cared for by non-elders with a giftedness and an interest in pastoral care. So here's a practical step-by-step process to help you address an issue in congregational life that is a true leadership moment, when the issue is not clearly understood and a solution is not readily apparent. But as we've seen in that definitions of leadership, the middle one had an earlier slide, leadership is about seeing the challenges, the real challenges, and tackling them and wrestling those challenges to the ground. And there's the summary of those steps. Scan your context and note your issues. Sense making. Try to understand what is really happening here. Assess whether this is a management moment or a leadership moment. Engage in faith reflection on the issue. Bring the congregation into conversation so that the congregation can begin to feel a sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo. Enter a learning phase to seek possible solutions for your issue. Then decide direction, implement with determination, learn from the experience. An excellent exercise is to look at these 7 steps and ask yourself, for our session, which of these steps are our strengths and which of these steps are our weaknesses? And then ask, how might we go about strengthening those areas of weakness and build them into real habits of practice? If a session wants to step up its game in congregational leadership, it will need to be very intentional about addressing its areas of weakness. But here's an idea. You can use this process to scan the leadership capacity of the session and to do some sense making around the strengths and weaknesses of your leadership practice. And then carry on applying the process to yourself as the session. In our society today, there is an astonishing amount of leadership training going on in organizations of every kind. Every organization faces rapidly changing contexts, so leadership is critical to the future well-being of organizations. Consequently, a lot of time and effort has gone into trying to figure out what's the most effective way to do leadership training. What works? What doesn't? One of these studies discovered the critical discovery is that educational programs such as this one that we're in right now, programs like this tend to fail in the aspiration of helping participants become better leaders. Put another way, on average, this workshop today will only help a minority of participants. According to these studies, most of you will not benefit from this webinar. Wow, why? It comes down to how you see yourself and what you're going to do about that. Ask yourself, am I a leader? If your answer is a confident yes, is your answer a confident yes? Is it a self-conscious no, or an uncertain I am not sure? The Presbyterian Church calls our formal leaders ruling elders, and in that name is the implication that you are a leader. If you are an elder or congregational pastor, the congregation has seen in you the giftedness for leadership, and so you have been called to a leadership office. To benefit from a webinar like this, you first have to believe that you are a leader. Now, we have all seen leaders. Some are poor, some may be good, some are exceptional. Leadership studies have shown that some people, by their nature, are oriented to be great leaders. However, studies show that most people, regardless of their nature, can learn to be leaders. Leadership capacity is learnable. That's because most of what leaders do is rooted in skill. And what makes a difference in leadership learning? Here's the question. Do you make leadership your craft? Leadership is a craft like woodworking, preaching, gardening, writing, playing guitar. If you make leadership your craft, then you're going to be proactive in your leader self-development. As I said, benefiting from a workshop like this will come down to these two things. How do you see yourself? I'm a leader. And what do you do about that? I make leadership my craft. If you make leadership your craft, you're going to benefit every single organization you are in. It'll be a benefit to your family, your hobby group, your workplace, your curling team, your church. If you make leadership your craft, you will want to build on the inspiration you find with this webinar. Take notes from it and strengthen skills. One last thought. If you make leadership your craft, you'll become more conscious of moments and opportunities you will have to express leadership. Those moments will also be learning moments. If you take the opportunity, express leadership in some way in that moment, and then reflect on the experience of expressing leadership, learn from it, you are going to accelerate your development as a leader. Studies like this, what I just said, comes right out of Bruce Savolio, Studies show this is to be the most effective way to grow as a leader. So knowing this, most everyone can learn the skills of leadership. Believe that you are a leader, make this your craft, and you are going to grow as a leader, becoming a greater asset for every organization you belong to. Wow, look at that. 11, or it's 40 minutes after the hour, bang on. In the handout with the notes for this presentation, there's 3 book recommendations. And the top one is Leadership Without Easy Answers by Ron Heifetz. If you can only read one, read that book. And there's 2 others as well. So that's it here for me with the webinar. And I guess I'm going to be trying to figure out how to switch to my webcam so we can do the question and answer.
Great, thank you, Peter. That has provided us with some great insight as to, in terms of growing leadership. We have had a couple of questions come in.
Good.
So one of the first questions was, can you briefly recommend various methods to conduct the step of scanning?
Sure. I guess so one of the things so I've been with my current congregation a few months now, and we're very much in the process of looking at change in our congregation. And an exercise that we did last night is we took one of those lists of character qualities of a vital congregation, and there were 11 items on it. And I set it up as a questionnaire with a 5-point Likert scale, rate it 1 to 5. And we had all the elders complete it. I encouraged them to do it honestly. And then we broke up into 3 discussion groups and talked about our reflections, shared our answers with each other. And then we had a big feedback session with everybody. And we highlighted internally to the life of the church the 2 things that at first glance that we thought would be important for us to pursue: strengthening pastoral care, and also developing some excellence in faith formation, helping people grow in their personal faith. So that was a tool that we used to do internal work, just to get an initial sense in session. In my last congregation, we were taking on a missional church orientation. And one of the things we did is we held a 1-day workshop where we invited different people from different sectors of, different helping sectors in the city of Calgary to come and talk a bit about what they see as needs in the city. And so we had someone from the administration of public education, social worker, community health, and such. And we just had them come in and say, from the work that I do, these are the kinds of things that we see as needs. And so what we did is we tapped people in the wider community who were experts on needs in the community to come in and share those. So there's a couple ideas. And I think I'm still online. Yeah, I can't hear Jennifer either. Can people hear me?
Peter, can you hear me now?
Oh, we can. I can.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. We had another question come in.
Okay.
And do you believe that leadership within the church is different than in the secular world?
Yes and no. Regardless of the organization you're in, we are still dealing with human animals. And so there is something about our wiring that is common to everybody. And we are, like if you're thinking Canada, there is certain commonalities because we share the same culture. So in that regard, there is a lot that we can learn out of the secular world about practices and leadership. When I say it's yes and no, the no is leadership is contextual, and so there's some uniqueness to church congregations as an organization, which is distinct from secular organizations. And leadership is always value-based. And so we would have certain beliefs and values which may be different from other organizations. So like we're not driven by the economic bottom line and profit margins and such like that. So so in that way, it's a yes and a no. There's a lot to be learned from the academic press, from the experience in other organizations about practices in leadership, but the nature of the church by way of its beliefs, values, priorities, its norms for behavior, that makes our context different. So yes and no.
Okay, thank you. Now is the chance if anyone else has any other questions to please type those into your chat box. The other, one other question that came up is just in terms of the slide deck. So we can make sure that we send those out to everyone who signed up for today's session. So you will get that. We can email that out this week. And I'm just going through, and I think that might be it for questions today.
I sent along to someone in your office earlier a PDF of my speaking notes. So every word I uttered is in that note.
Perfect.
So that's probably a more comprehensive thing, a more helpful thing than the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Peter. So we'll ensure that that gets out to everyone. Oh, we've had one more question come in.
Hey.
How do you recommend dealing with people in terms of change? Oh, and it just popped away from me, sorry. Is quicker than leadership process inquiries. So I think, let's see. So I think that's asking in terms of the timing for this process, in terms of bringing about change. Can you talk a bit about that in terms of what people can expect in terms of the timing and how long this process can take in terms of growing leadership change?
Sure. So it really depends. That really depends on how the degree of change that the congregation may be asked to consider. Because the more dramatic it is in veering away from the current culture of a church, the more time it's going to take. When I talk about congregational change, in talking about more substantive change, and I often say that it'll take 18 months to go from the first step of scanning and noting things right through to complete implementation in a way that is now ingrained in the life of a church. But it's again, that's very contextual. Coming to Varsity Acres Church here, they were very primed and ready to go with a high degree of motivation to begin the process right away. And so we dealt with practical matters like getting the budget fixed, and we're now in the midst of retooling our church organization. And in the last 4 or 5 days, we've started conversations with the youth group Friday, everyone at the congregational meeting on Sunday, the session on Tuesday. And so 5 months in, we're now at that point. So, but this group is highly motivated to go. And so I expect if we're really starting the process now, by Christmas, I hope that we've got something that as a direction that everyone can really be enthusiastic about. So so if you're so it depends on how significant it is. And how do you help people with change? So in the PDF, there is a reference to, let's just see if it's, oh, there they are. There we go. There's the books. When it comes to helping people deal with change, in a mildly self-serving way, the third book up there on the screen is mine, on how to motivate churches to face the future. A lot of the work, the substantial work that needs to be done is helping people appreciate their attitudes and to give them support as they reflect on their attitudes and perhaps revise their attitudes. And that's often, I think, the thing that we experience as a hump in congregational change is we don't appreciate that. We understand that attitudes can be a barrier to change, but we don't actually tackle that issue. And if you understand, and so in the book, there's half a chapter on how to understand attitudes and how to help people acknowledge and perceive their attitudes and begin to reflect on them.
Okay, great. And I guess we have time maybe for one more question. Peter, what is the best method of creating motivation without raising alarm within a congregation? Yeah,
so great question. There's an ongoing debate about what motivates best. Concern about current reality, and that's a push motivation. And that's the alarm, perhaps an extreme expression of that, or else pull motivations, which are people desiring and desiring a certain goal be achieved and anticipating that can happen. And so current reality, concern about issues around current reality can become concerns, and those concerns can be push motives for people to want to do something new. Goals are where our hopes lay, and what we hope for are things that we desire to happen, and if hope is real, there's some anticipation that what we desire can actually happen. And the way I've come to look at it now is you have to help people understand that in some way, current reality is no longer, the way we do things in current reality is no longer serving us. And so people have to appreciate that and come to have some concern. And this is the first thing I think that gets us off the pot and moving. If you think about, take personal health, your doctor may be saying for ages, you have to exercise and lose weight and fix your diet or else you're going to have heart problems. And how many people do nothing until they have the first warnings that, their heart's not working well. And then all of a sudden they jump into action. And so often with people, they just won't start until they have concern about what's happening in current reality. But I think you have to, as I say, change horses as you begin to get towards understanding a concrete goal that you may want to pursue, and you can begin to transfer the motivation to the hope. And then you may have the benefit of having the concerns in current reality pushing, but also the attractional pull motives of the hopes both working in concert and moving you along. And so I've always been a proponent of people having to become dissatisfied with how things are now first, and then you can shift the motivational weight to hope when the goal becomes more clear.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you so much, Peter. As I mentioned, we will make both the speaking notes and the presentation available to everyone today. Yep. And I just want to thank you so much, Peter, for being a part of today and for sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure.
Great, and I want to thank everyone else for joining in and for being a part of it. If any other questions do come in, please feel free to send them to either myself or Emily Hill at Canadian Ministries, and we can pass those along to Peter. And we always love hearing everyone's feedback. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or any ideas for any future webinars as well. So thank you again to everyone for joining us today, and a special thank you to Peter. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.